Before we dive into today's intense story, a quick reminder. Over 90% of our viewers watch our videos but aren't subscribed. If you enjoy content like this, take a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. And if you find this story gripping, don't forget to like the video. It really helps us out.
I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who had a secret to hide. I used to look at women in stories who led double lives and wonder what went so wrong in their worlds. Now, I realize life isn't made of clean choices. It's made of moments, some heavy, some blurry, some that grow louder in your mind every time you try to forget them. My name is Alina, and for most of my adult life, I was a wife. Just that, a wife. Maybe that's where everything started to go wrong, when I stopped being anything else. I met Armin when I was 24. He was 30, confident, and had this quiet intensity that made him stand out from the other men I'd dated. He had a good job in finance, talked like he always had a plan, and made me feel like I was a prize. The kind of man who opens the door for you but never lets you forget he's the one who holds the keys. We married after just a year of dating. My parents were thrilled. His mother adored me. Everything seemed perfect, but perfection is deceiving. It's a glossy surface that often hides the cracks below. At first, our marriage was steady, not wildly romantic, not overly passionate, but stable, predictable. We moved into a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. He was always on time, always composed, and always a little distant. I didn't notice it then. Or maybe I did, but I mistook it for maturity. He wasn't the clingy type, and I respected that. I was working part-time at a publishing firm and finishing my second degree. We were busy, both of us. We told ourselves that was normal. 3 years in, things started changing, subtly. I began to feel like I was alone even when he was around. I'd talk and he'd nod without really listening. He came home later, stopped asking how my day was. At dinner, he'd scroll through his phone or eat in silence. I started filling the empty space with noise. Podcasts, Netflix, long phone calls with friends. I even took up painting again, something I hadn't done since college. The worst part? He never complained about anything. Not the distance, not the silence, not me pulling away. He just kept coasting like nothing was wrong. I told myself it was just a phase, that maybe all long-term couples fall into a routine. That love was supposed to evolve, not burn forever. But deep down, I was starving for connection, for attention, for someone to see me. That's when Kabir moved in next door. He was a few years younger than me, probably 25, and had just started working with a tech company. I first saw him when he was unloading boxes from a rental truck, tall, lean, and completely unbothered by the chaos of moving. He waved when he saw me watching from the porch. That smile was disarming. For weeks, we barely exchanged more than polite greetings. He seemed busy, always coming and going. But one afternoon, our interaction changed. I was struggling to carry a heavy planter to the backyard when he offered to help. It was a small gesture, but it opened a door. That led to more casual interactions. We'd bump into each other near the mailbox. He'd ask me for suggestions on where to eat nearby or how to deal with the nosy landlord. Eventually, we started having actual conversations. He was funny, quirky in a way Armin never was. He talked with his hands, laughed easily, and listened like my words meant something. There was nothing inappropriate at first, just simple, human connection. But when you've been invisible for so long, being seen feels like a spotlight, and I basked in it. The shift was slow. Harmless walks around the block, coffee in the garden while the sun was still rising. He'd tell me about his day, his ideas, his dreams, and I'd tell him about mine, about the dreams I'd buried under laundry and bills and silence. One rainy afternoon, we ended up talking in his garage, the storm trapping us there. We sat on crates and talked for hours. He told me about his mother who had passed away when he was a teenager. I told him about how lonely I felt in my own home. That was the first time I cried in front of him, and he didn't look away. That night, I couldn't sleep. My chest felt heavy, not with guilt, but with fear. Not fear of what I might feel, but fear of what I'd already felt. I knew I was standing on a dangerous edge, and one step forward would change everything. Still, I did nothing to step back. The conversations with Kabir became the highlight of my days. I'd wait by the window in the mornings. I'd check if his car was in the driveway. I started dressing better, wearing perfume again, smiling more, things I hadn't done in years. But it wasn't just about him. It was about how I felt around him, alive, not just a wife, not just a routine. Armand noticed the changes. He asked once if I'd changed shampoos. Another time, he asked why I was always out in the yard, but that was it. No real curiosity, no confrontation. Part of me resented that. A bigger part was relieved. One evening, Armand came home late again. I had made dinner, his favorite. He barely touched it, said he was tired, and went to bed. I sat at the table for an hour after he left. The candles had burned out. The food had gone cold, and I realized that I hadn't laughed with my husband in almost a year. The next morning, I told myself I needed distance from both men. I started avoiding Kabir. I told him I was busy with work, with family. I needed time to clear my head. He respected that, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. One evening, about a week later, he left a note on my porch. It wasn't romantic. It simply said, "I don't want to make your life complicated, but I hope you're okay. You deserve more than silence." I read that note at least 20 times. It sat folded in my purse for weeks. Meanwhile, things with Armand kept deteriorating. He was away on business more often. When he was home, he was barely present. No fights, no passion, just cold civility. I once asked him if he was happy, and he said, "Happiness is a luxury we can't afford to chase. We have responsibilities." That line kept echoing in my head. I didn't go back to Kabir, not yet. But I also stopped pretending that everything was okay. I started journaling. I started therapy. I told myself I needed to understand why I let myself fade in a marriage that was still standing, but long since hollowed. Months passed. One night, while cleaning out a drawer in Armand's study, I found something. An old photo of us from our honeymoon. I looked at it for a long time. We looked happy, or at least younger. Less broken. Then I noticed something tucked behind it. A receipt for a hotel booking, dated only 3 weeks ago. It was a 5-star hotel, one we'd never been to, one far too expensive for a solo work trip. I didn't scream. I didn't confront him that night. I just sat on the floor, holding that receipt like it was a page from a script I didn't remember auditioning for. It turned out that while I had been tiptoeing near a line, Armand had already crossed it. I wasn't just a neglected wife anymore. I was a betrayed one, and that changed everything. I didn't tell anyone at first, not even my sister, not my closest friend, and certainly not Kabir. That receipt sat in a locked drawer like a loaded question I wasn't ready to answer. Every time I looked at Armand, I saw it in the corner of my mind. The image of him walking into that hotel. Who was she? How long had it been going on? Did he love her? Strangely, those questions hurt less than one that haunted me the most. Did he even care about me anymore? I stopped trying to fix us. I stopped putting effort into conversations, into dinners, into pretending I didn't notice when he took late calls outside or left his phone screen down on the table. The energy I used to spend trying to be a good wife, I started spending on myself. At first it felt awkward, then, quietly, empowering. I went back to painting seriously. I joined a local art studio once a week. I reconnected with college friends. I picked up freelance editing jobs that kept me busy and made me feel valuable outside our home. I even began volunteering on weekends at a children's reading program. It's not that I didn't feel hurt. I felt shattered. But I didn't want to stay broken. Not for a man who didn't bother to ask if I was okay when I cried myself to sleep. Armand never confessed. Never once said, "We need to talk." He just acted like everything was business as usual. That's when I knew. This wasn't a one-time slip. This was a man living in two worlds, one for appearances and one for himself. That's also when I realized something else. He probably assumed I'd never find out. Or worse, that even if I did, I wouldn't have the courage to do anything about it. So I started planning. Not a dramatic plan, not a fiery confrontation or some scandalous affair of my own. My revenge would be slower, silent, calculated. Not for him, but for me. To take back my story. I began documenting things, not because I wanted to shame him, but because I needed to understand how I'd been so blind. I checked his credit card statements. I paid attention to his absences. I pieced together that he had been seeing the same woman for nearly 6 months. Her name was Rania. I recognized the name from a message that briefly popped on his phone once, months ago. I'd brushed it off as a work contact. But it wasn't. She was a project manager at a marketing firm he worked with. Divorced. Attractive in a calculated kind of way. I found her profile online. What surprised me most was how normal she seemed. Not some seductress or villain, just a woman who probably thought she was dating a man in an unhappy marriage. Maybe she pitied him. Maybe she felt powerful. Maybe she believed she was saving him. That part didn't even make me angry. What made me angry was that Armin could share laughter and words and late-night thoughts with her. The same things I'd long begged for. I didn't confront either of them. I didn't scream or weep in front of him. I didn't destroy anything. Instead, I began extracting myself from the emotional web of our marriage, string by string. I contacted a lawyer quietly and asked about my options. I didn't want to destroy him. I wanted to be free. Meanwhile, Kabir still lived next door. We hadn't spoken properly in weeks, but I would see him in the yard or on his way to work. He always gave me space, never asked questions, never pushed. One evening, he left a small canvas outside my door. It was blank except for a note taped on it. "Paint your piece." I cried when I saw it. That week, I painted for the first time in months. Not pretty things, not perfect things, just raw colors and chaotic strokes that poured out of me like ink from a cracked pen. For the first time in a long while, I felt alive for a reason that had nothing to do with someone else. I didn't want to involve Kabir in my healing, not directly. He didn't deserve to be part of the mess I was unraveling. But one Sunday, as I was watering the plants, he walked over with 2 mugs of tea. We sat on the steps silently for several minutes. Then he said, "You look stronger." I don't know what happened, but I see it. I smiled faintly and replied, "I think I just got tired of feeling weak." He didn't pry. He just nodded and said, "Good." That night, Armin came home earlier than usual. He was in a good mood, humming to himself, scrolling his phone. I watched him from the hallway. There was something surreal about seeing him like that, so content, knowing what I knew. He noticed me watching and said, "What's up?" I just smiled. "Nothing, just tired." The next day, I served him breakfast, kissed his cheek, and handed him a folder. Inside was a detailed outline of our assets, my plans for a separation, and a calm letter explaining I knew everything. He went pale. He didn't say anything at first. Then, after reading through half of it, he whispered, "You're serious?" "Yes," I replied, "and I'm not angry. I'm done." He stared at me like I had grown another head, like the quiet, loyal wife he had ignored all these years had finally broken the script. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I just got up and went back to washing the dishes. He tried talking that evening, tried telling me he was confused, stressed, that the other woman didn't mean anything, that he still loved me. But his words felt like makeup on a broken mirror. No matter how pretty the touch-up, the cracks remained. For the first time, I didn't feel pain. I felt clarity. Over the next few weeks, we lived like polite strangers. I moved my things into the guest room. We coordinated household tasks like coworkers. Eventually, he agreed to mediation. I didn't fight for the house. I didn't want it. It held too many ghosts. What I did fight for was my future. I found a small studio apartment close to the art center. I sold some of my paintings online. I took more editing clients. Slowly, I started building a life where I wasn't just someone's wife. I was myself. The strangest part? I felt freer in that tiny apartment than I ever did in our 4-bedroom house. One day, months later, I bumped into Kabir while carrying groceries. He offered to help. We walked up the stairs in silence. When we reached my door, he looked at me and asked, "So, you good?" I laughed a little. "I'm getting there." He didn't press further, just smiled. "Good, you deserve that." And then he walked away. I didn't chase him. I didn't need to. For the first time, I wasn't chasing anything. I was walking forward. But the story isn't over, because healing isn't a finish line, it's a path. And sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't in hurting someone back. It's in choosing yourself without fear. It's strange how quiet the world feels when you're no longer pretending. After the separation, I thought I'd feel grief that swallowed me whole. But instead, what came was a gentle silence. Not the kind filled with loneliness, but one that held space for me to finally hear myself. I moved into my new place on a rainy Thursday. No housewarming party, no grand announcement, just me, a few boxes, and a single cup of chai. I sat on the floor, surrounded by the scent of cardboard and wet pavement, and felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. My days took on a different rhythm. I'd wake early, go for a walk, paint when the urge struck, edit manuscripts for clients across the globe, and take time to sit with myself, truly sit, without distraction. There was no one to check on me, no dinner to prepare for someone who wouldn't show up on time, no eggshells to walk on. It was quiet. But I was not lonely. Armin called a few times. The first time was to apologize. The second was to say he missed me. The third was to tell me Rania had left him. I listened. I didn't offer comfort. I had none left to give him. He said, "I thought we were okay, you know? You never said anything." And I said the truest thing I had ever told him. "You never asked." That was the last time we spoke. One evening, about 6 months after the divorce, I saw Kabir again. We were both at a local art show. He was standing in front of one of my pieces, one I had painted during the hardest part of the separation. It was chaotic, full of jagged lines and clashing colors. He stared at it for a long time. When he noticed me behind him, he smiled gently. "Yours?" I nodded. "It's loud," he said thoughtfully, but not angry. Just honest. I shrugged, smiling faintly. That's how I felt. We talked for an hour that night. Not about the past, not about what could have been, just about life, art, music, cities we wanted to visit. He didn't ask about Armin. I didn't ask about anyone he may have been seeing. It was like 2 old pages finally folding into a new chapter. Still, I wasn't in a rush. I wasn't chasing closure or comfort. I had become whole on my own. That was something no one could take from me again. One morning, I found an envelope under my apartment door. No name, just a short note in neat handwriting. There's something beautiful about someone who rebuilds without noise. I never confirmed it, but I knew it was from Kabir. Life didn't become perfect, but it became mine. I started teaching weekend art classes for kids. I hosted a small online group for women going through quiet heartbreaks, the kind that don't always scream but still echo in your chest. I kept painting. I laughed more. There are still moments when the past whispers. When I remember the girl I used to be, waiting at windows, apologizing for needing attention, shrinking to fit into someone else's silence. But now I smile at her, softly, and tell her, "You made it out. Revenge? What I did wasn't revenge. Revenge would have meant I still gave Armand power. What I did was reclamation. I reclaimed my voice, my identity, my space in the world. In the end, I didn't need him to fall. I only needed to rise. And I did, quietly, fully, finally."